Imagine, if you will, a tree. But not just any tree. I want you to picture something that looks ancient. I mean, gnarled bark, twisting branches, roots that look like they've been gripping a mountainside for centuries. It has that sort of weather-beaten majesty.
It creates a very specific image in the mind. Survival against all odds.
Exactly. But here's the twist. This tree isn't on a cliff. It's not in a national park. It's sitting right there on a coffee table. It's maybe 18 inches tall.
Yeah.
And it's 500 years old.
It is a striking image. It really disrupts our sense of scale and time. It forces your brain to do a double take because the biological signals of age, the texture, the shape, they just clash with the physical size.
It breaks your brain a little bit. And when you look at something like that, you have to ask, what is actually going on here? Is this thing a genetic mutant? Is it some, tortured soul trapped in a tiny body? Or is it a masterpiece of biological hacking?
That is the core question. And today, we are going to get to the bottom of it. We've got a stack of research here: horticultural analysis, historical archives from places like Longwood Gardens, the Bonsai Empire, and perhaps most surprisingly, some pretty dense medical journals.
Yeah, the medical journals really threw me for a loop. I did not expect to see neuroscience in a gardening deep dive. I usually just associate gardening with back pain, not brain scans.
Yeah, there's a connection, as we'll see.
So the mission for today is to really debunk the myths around these tiny trees. We're going to find out that what we think of as bonsai is actually this complex mix of forgotten history, some pretty intense biological manipulation, what I'm calling biohacking, and weirdly enough, medical therapy.
It really is a story about verum in factis truth, in the facts. We need to move past the aesthetic, past just looking at a pretty little tree, and get into the physiology, the history that makes it all possible. Because when you understand how it exists, it really changes why you appreciate it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because I think 99% of people, myself included, hear the word bonsai, and their brain immediately goes to Japan. Maybe they picture Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid. It just feels quintessentially Japanese, like Sufi or samurai, but our sources say we've got the geography all wrong.
We do, and that's a really common misconception. While Japan perfected and sort of codified the style we know today, the origin story is actually Chinese. The practice began in the Chinese Empire around 700 AD.
700 AD. So it predates the Japanese tradition by quite a bit. That's over 1,000 years ago.
By centuries.
Yeah.
The original term was Bonsai, which later evolved into what's known as penjing.
Penjing.
And the whole vibe, the philosophy behind it was very different from what you see in a modern Japanese garden.
How so? Was it just a difference in the type of tree, or was the actual intent different?
It was a difference in scope. Japanese bonsai, generally speaking, is about the singular tree. It's like a portrait. But Chinese penjing was about the landscape. It wasn't just a tree in a pot. It was a diorama.
A diorama, like a whole scene.
Exactly. They would include rocks to simulate mountains, sometimes water features for rivers. And they often prized what the sources call these sacred, grotesque forms.
Grotesque. That's not a word I usually associate with gardening. You usually want pretty or lush.
In this context, it meant twisted, strange, dragon-like shapes. The goal wasn't some kind of perfect symmetry, it was character. It was about capturing the macro world, the entire universe in miniature. It was expansive. You weren't just looking at a plant, you were looking at a mountain range that you could hold in your hands.
That's a very different kind of energy. I hold the universe in this pot. So when did it make the jump over to Japan? And why did it change so much?
That happened during the Kamakura period, so roughly between 1185 and 1333. And this is where the cultural context gets really fascinating. When the art form crossed the ocean, it met Zen Buddhism.
And Zen changes everything.
It strips everything down. The Zen influence took those elaborate Chinese landscapes and just removed the rocks, removed the water, removed all the scenery. The focus narrowed completely to the individual tree. It became a living sculpture of minimalism and discipline.
So it went from a diorama of the entire world to a meditation on the self.
Precisely. The Japanese aesthetic wasn't about recreating a mountain range anymore. It was about capturing the essence of a single tree in its purest, most disciplined form. It became an art of reduction.
That's such a cool distinction. Like the difference between a big maximalist Baroque painting, full of details and background and cherubs, and then a piece of modern minimalist architecture where every single line has to be perfect because there's nowhere to hide.
That's a great analogy. In the Japanese tradition, the empty space, the negative space between the branches, is just as important as the branches themselves. It's about what isn't there as much as what is.
Okay, but let's pivot to the thing that blows my mind every time I see one of these, the size. I think there's a common belief, and I definitely thought this before, that these are special seeds, right? Like, you go buy a packet of bonsai seeds and they just grow small.
That is the single biggest misconception in the entire field, and it's one that marketers just love to exploit. You see these ads for bonsai kits with special seeds. But the reality is, if you take a seed from a 500-year-old 18-inch bonsai and you plant it in the ground in your backyard, do you know what happens?
I assume it stays pretty small, maybe a dwarf version of the tree, like a pony versus a horse.
Not at all. It grows into a 100-foot giant. Massive oak, or a towering pine, or a sprawling maple.
No way. So the seed has the full potential. It hasn't been genetically altered at all.
Biologically, these are completely ordinary trees. There is no dwarf DNA involved. They are genetically identical to their full-size cousins out in the forest.
So it really is a hack. You are tricking the tree. You're taking something that should be a giant and convincing it to be a toy.
Tricking is a fair word, but I might say reprogramming. You have to talk about how trees actually grow. To understand why a bonsai stays small, we need to discuss a concept called apical dominance. Apical dominance. Okay, that sounds like a military term. Or something from a corporate strategy meeting.
It operates remarkably like both. Think of a tree like a corporate hierarchy, or maybe a growing teenager. What's the primary goal of a young tree in a dense forest?
To survive, to get sunlight, to not get shaded out by the bigger trees.
Exactly. It needs to beat the other trees to the sun. It is a race to the top. So the tree wants to grow up. This is a core survival mechanism. The terminal buds, the very tips of the branches, produce a hormone called auxin.
Auxin. Okay, and what's auxin's job in this corporate hierarchy?
Auxin is the CEO screaming, growth, expansion, upward trajectory. It pours down the trunk from the top, and it actively suppresses the growth of side branches. Tells the rest of the plant, don't get bushy, don't waste energy going sideways. We need height. Height is life. Okay, so it's the drill sergeant shouting, forward march! It keeps everything narrow and focused on getting tall.
Exactly. Because in the wild, if you grow wide before you grow tall, you get shaded out and you die. But here's the hack. A bonsai grower comes along and snips off those terminal buds. They cut off the source of the auxin.
You silence the drill sergeant, you fire the CEO.
And when the auxin levels drop, a different hormone gets to take over. It's called cytokinin.
Cytokinin. And what's its agenda?
Cytokinin is more like the union representative, or maybe the creative director. It says, okay, the boss is gone, we can't go up, so let's spread out. It encourages lateral bushy growth. It wakes up all those dormant buds lower down on the trunk that auxin was suppressing.
So by cutting the top, you force the tree to become more compact and complex instead of tall and lanky?
Yes, you are literally manipulating the hormonal war inside the plant. You suppress the vertical drive, and you amplify the lateral complexity. This process is called ramification. You turn one branch into two, two into four, four into eight. That's how you get that look of a massive ancient canopy, but on a miniature scale.
That makes total sense. You're redirecting the biological traffic. But wait a second, if you just keep cutting the top, wouldn't the roots keep growing? You'd have a tiny tree with this massive root system. Wouldn't it choke itself?
You've just hit on the second half of the hack, the root-shoot ratio. In nature, the canopy mirrors the roots. Big canopy, big roots. In bonsai, we use a container. The roots are confined.
Right, the tiny pot, which is actually what bonsai means, right? Planted in a container.
It is, but it's not just about trapping them. The grower actively prunes the roots, too. This creates a state of equilibrium. The roots are reduced, so the top growth slows down to match what the roots can support. But, and this is the key, the tree isn't stunted in a sickly way. It enters a stable state where it essentially believes it's a full-size specimen that's just living in a very small pocket of soil on a rocky cliff.
So it adapts. It basically says, okay, this is my environment. I'm just going to be the best 18-inch tree I can be.
It functions perfectly, just on a different scale. It flowers, it fruits, it changes color in the autumn. It is a biological illusion sustained by perfect balance.
That is wild. It thinks it's a giant, but it fits on a shelf. But this brings us to the controversial part. I've heard this from people before. They look at a bonsai, especially when you talk about snipping roots and confining it, and they feel kind of bad for it.
A cruelty argument, yeah.
They say it looks cruel. Like foot binding for trees, that we're starving this thing and torturing it just to keep it cute. Is there any merit to that at all?
This is a very common emotional reaction. And it's understandable. We see confinement and we immediately think prison. But if we actually look at the data, the Factum-style analysis of the horticulture, that argument just doesn't hold up.
So you're saying it's not torture, Because cutting roots, that just sounds painful, even if trees don't have nerves in the same way we do.
I would argue it's the exact opposite of torture. It's extreme privilege. Let's think about a tree in the wild. What is its life actually like?
I mean, it's nature. It's kind of romantic, right? Birds singing, fresh air.
It's brutal. It is a constant battle for resources. You have drought, where the tree is literally dying of thirst for weeks on end.
Yeah.
You have nutrient scarcity in the soil. You have pests eating its leaves, fungus rotting its bark, lightning strikes, ice storms, not to mention overcrowding from its neighbors that are all stealing the sun. A wild tree is constantly stressed. It is fighting for its life every single day.
Okay, when you put it that way, it sounds more like a war zone.
Now compare that to a high-end bonsai.
The bonsai has a personal attendant.
It has a concierge. These trees don't live in backyard dirt. They live in specialized fired clay particles, often called akadama, that are perfectly optimized for oxygen flow and drainage. They get precise nutrient timing. If a bug lands on a leaf, it's removed immediately. They are watered exactly when they need it, never too much, never too little.
So it's less like a prison cell and more like a luxury spa that you can never leave.
Precisely. The smallness comes from redirecting the tree's energy, not from depriving it of energy. The tree is incredibly healthy. It's just channeling that health into density rather than height. It isn't starving, it's thriving in a very focused way.
And the proof is in the pudding, right? Or the potting soil, I guess, because these things live forever.
That is the ultimate rebuttal to the cruelty argument. There are specimens in the Tokyo Imperial Palace collection that are over 500 years old. Some are even older. There's a famous white pine that survived Hiroshima.
That's just mind-boggling. 500 years.
A pine tree in the wild might live 200 or 300 years before rot or storm damage or a logger takes it down. These bonsai are outliving their wild counterparts by centuries because they are protected. They become these living archives.
It's amazing to think that you could be watering a tree today that was started by someone while Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel. That tree has seen empires rise and fall, and it's still just sitting there needing to be watered.
It really puts our own timeline in perspective. It forces you to think about time differently.
Which is a perfect segue, actually. Because we've talked about what the tree is feeling or not feeling, but I want to talk about what the human feels. Because the sources for this deep dive included those medical journals we mentioned earlier.
Yes, this is where we move from horticulture to neuroscience.
Right, because this isn't just, oh, plants make me feel nice. We all kind of know that walks in the park are good for you, but they actually hooked people up to machines to prove it.
They did. Researchers used near-infrared spectroscopy on subjects who were viewing bonsai trees. They wanted to see what was physically happening inside the brain by measuring blood flow and oxygenation in real time.
And what did the machines show? What happens to my brain when I look at the tiny tree?
The results were quite specific. Viewing these trees significantly reduced activity in the prefrontal cortex.
And for those of us who skipped med school, the prefrontal cortex is?
That's the CEO of the brain. It handles complex cognitive behavior, decision-making, social planning, and crucially, worry. It's the part of your brain that just spins in circles, stressing about your email inbox or your mortgage or that awkward thing you said at a party 5 years ago. It's the part of the brain that never shuts up.
So looking at the tree basically tells the brain's CEO to go take a coffee break. It just shuts down the noise.
Exactly. It quiets the executive function. The study showed that interaction with bonsai increased parasympathetic nervous activity, that's your rest and digest system, and it decreased sympathetic nervous activity, which is your fight or flight response.
That's incredible. It's like a biological switch. You look at the tree and your body physically shifts gears out of stress mode.
It is. And the sources mentioned specific applications for this. This isn't just suggesting everyone buy a tree for their desk to look cool. They're looking at this for patients with spinal cord injuries or people in high-stress occupations. They call it nature therapy.
It makes sense. You're looking at something that represents age and patience and resilience. It's hard to be frantic when you're staring at something that's taken 500 years to grow 18 inches.
It forces you to slow down your internal clock. You can't rush a bonsai. If you try to rush it, you kill it. It demands a different kind of attention, a soft fascination, as some psychologists call it. It engages you without wearing you out.
Soft fascination. I like that. It's the opposite of doom scrolling.
Yes. Doom scrolling is hard attention that drains you. This is soft attention that restores you.
It's the anti-TikTok.
Yes, exactly. It is the anti-TikTok. It is a long-form engagement in a short-form world. It requires you to submit to the tree's timeline, not your own.
So let's just recap what we've uncovered here. We started with the idea of a tiny tree and found out it's actually a globe-trotting history lesson.
Right. We went from the penjing landscapes of the Chinese Empire, which tried to capture the whole universe,
Dragons and mountains included.
to the Zen minimalism of Japan, which tried to capture the essence of the self through reduction.
And then we went under the hood, or under the bark, I guess. We learned that it's not a genetic mutant. It's a standard tree that's been hacked using apical dominance.
The war between Auxin and Cytokinin. We learned that by suppressing the vertical growth hormone, we unlock the lateral potential of the plant. We trade height for complexity.
And we busted the myth that it's torture. It's actually a life of luxury, a concierge service with specialized clay and precise pruning.
That leads to immortality, practically.
Or at least an extreme longevity that puts our lifespans to shame. And finally, we found out that these things are basically stress relief devices that hack our own nervous systems, quieting that prefrontal cortex and forcing us to just chill out.
It really connects the dots between biology, history, and psychology. It's not just gardening. It's a lesson in perspective and really biological management.
It really changes how I look at them. I used to just see a cool plant in a mall kiosk. Now I see this complex interplay of human intention and natural response. It's a collaboration.
That's the beauty of it. It's a partnership. The tree grows, the human guides, and together they create something that neither could create alone. The tree provides the life, the human provides the form.
So here's where I want to leave things. We mentioned that these trees can live for centuries. The sources explicitly mention that a properly cared for bonsai will outlive its owner.
Yes, if you buy a good bonsai or you create one, you are really just its custodian for a generation. You're a temporary guardian.
That's a heavy thought. When we look at a bonsai, we aren't just looking at a plant. We're looking at something that will be here long after we're gone. It's going to be sitting on someone else's table, giving them that same sense of peace, maybe 100 years from now. So here's the question. Does owning a bonsai require us to accept our own mortality? Is that part of the therapy?
That is a profound question.
Yes.
Perhaps the tree isn't just calming us down physiologically. It's teaching us philosophically that we are just a small part of a much, much longer story. It teaches humility.
Something to mull over the next time you see a little tree in a pot. Thanks for diving in with us.
Always a pleasure.